Alright, hey everybody, we're going to be checking out some sequence breaking here in Dark Souls. We've already seen a lot from several of these other videos that have been posted on Something Awful, so what I'm going to do is just run through the Asylum here. Main thing I'm doing here is just getting through it at a high speed. Zane went through it pretty quickly, just pointing things out, but he also moved a little more slowly to show everything the way it is. Really, there's not much to say about the Asylum. It's a small area, and most of the interesting things in it are only going to be here after you come back, which of course you are going to come back, because they wouldn't have put all that crap in there that you can't get if you couldn't. The first bonfire, I think you automatically actually warp here if you die, so I don't think it even matters if you light it. But I'm not actually sure. You might end up going back to the cell instead. You'll notice that I have not started as a pyromancer. While everybody seems to like that, I've decided to start as a wanderer. That's the class. The wanderer's armor is actually one of the better starting armors in terms of its defenses to its weight. It's a low weight armor set, it's basically light armor, but it has decent defenses for what it is. The only problem with it is it has no poise, like most of the starting sets, other than the warrior's helmet and the knight's armor. The shield that the Wanderer starts with is a leather shield. It's a pretty crappy light shield. It's an okay parrying shield, but there are much better shields for parrying and much better shields for blocking, so we're not going to use it after we get out of the Asylum. The starting weapon is a scimitar. It's a curved sword. It's actually the weakest curved sword, and there's basically no reason to use it over the later ones, but it'll serve us okay for now, and it has a specific purpose that it can be used for a little bit later. We're also going to dodge the rolling ball. Zane's way of just walking up the side is one that I've never done. I usually just either let myself get hit by it or drop off to open that shortcut. It's interesting, though, seeing him do it that way. In the meantime, we'll pick up the Estus flasks and the key and get the hell out of here, because there's really nothing interesting to talk about here, other than some starting gear stuff. If you are a pyromancer, sorcerer, or hunter, that area on the right there, as you saw in Zane, will have a corpse that has your ranged weapon on it. Be it your pyro hand, your catalyst, I guess if you're a priest, you also have your talisman there, or the hunter's short bow, which are all pretty useful. The Wanderer is a class that doesn't start with a ranged anything, so there's nothing there. There is some advantage to starting as a sorcerer, or pyromancer, or priest, in that you end up with a free copy of a pyromancer miracle, and you can still buy more. So technically you would have more copies of Fireball if you started as a pyromancer. I'm just doing this mostly for variety. Now this was really lucky. The Hollow Soldiers have a chance to drop a longsword. I've never actually seen a longsword drop in the Asylum. It's actually probably a weapon that I prefer to the scimitar for its moveset, but with our starting stats, the scimitar does more damage. And as we're about to see on the Asylum Demon, it has another neat feature. Now you notice that we hit for 93 and then we suddenly hit on that second hit for 406. The reason for that, and it's not because the scimitar does more damage than other starting weapons which don't do that much on a plunging attack. It doesn't. What it does do, however, is have bleed buildup, and I guess a plunging attack causes an enormous amount of bleed buildup. The Asylum Demon is actually vulnerable to bleed, so what ends up happening is he ends up getting hit for an enormous amount of damage from that plunging attack, so that's a quick way to deal with it. The the Thief starts with a Bandit Dagger. I don't recall if that causes bleed. The Scimitar definitely does, so the Wanderer is one of the few classes that can bleed out the Asylum Demon. That's marginally useful, really, because if you're playing as a Sorcerer or Pyromancer, you can just hit him with magic anyway. And you can't kill him early. It would be nice if you could, but the only way I've ever done that without mind-numbing tedium from punching him in the ass a million times is to start with black firebombs. If you do that, you can actually kill him before you ever leave, which is pretty neat. We'll head to Lordran, and now we can start with some fun. First thing we'll do, of course, is rest at the bonfire, but again, I think as soon as you arrive in Lordran, you actually end up doing something else. We'll load from here. And now we're going to do a simple early run. Mostly what we'll do is grab everything that we have lying around in Firelink, which is a lot of stuff, most of it useless. There's some fire bombs up here. Zane showed those off. There's really nothing to say about those, but as Geops LP has shown, they're actually pretty useful early on. What we're planning to do, though, will be to overpower ourselves so much that fire bombs are going to seem real weak. While I remember to, we're also going to level up a little bit. The Wanderer's starting build is pretty good. It's balanced. It has 14 dexterity, which is fine because that's about as much as I want right now. The plan for this build is going to be an intelligence build. Zane has said that he doesn't want to show off some of the cheap magic that you can use to really break the game, so I figured I would. Now the build's going to be a little unorthodox because I want to get some things that make the early game useful, less tedious, even though if I were just doing this myself, I'd probably grind a little bit. Because we've also leveled up our sword a bit, or our strength a bit, I can now use the longsword a little bit better than the scimitar. I could use it before because the requirements for 10 strength, 10 dexterity. It's a real easy weapon to use. And what I like about it is that the longsword has that standard straight sword moveset, which is that it can slash. It'll also do up and down attacks if you're two-handing it with the R1, and it will, which is the, if you're using an Xbox, I think that's the weak attack. And then the strong attacks are thrusts, which are really useful, and then the two-handed strong attack is a stronger slash. That moveset covers really everything that you could want, and it's pretty useful. The problem with it is there's only a handful of good weapons that use that particular moveset, and the longsword is interesting because it levels up equally from your strength and dexterity. The curved swords are more dexterity focused, and there are some weapons that are a little bit more strength focused. Honestly, the dexterity focused weapons are probably better, but in this case I like the balance early on, especially since we're going to be getting our strength up a little higher than our dexterity for a while. It's going to be going to 16, the dexterity will stay at 14. That lets me use all the early weapons that I'm going to find, and I'll show you what we're talking about here. First we're going to go with the secret stash, which apparently is Petrus's, and we're going to raid that. He never mentions it, which is good. Instead we're going to go in on a graveyard run. Now I have used all my souls leveling up, specifically because the graveyard runs tend to be suicide runs. A lot of people go in on a new character. They're not really equipped to fight those giant skeletons that are rising up from the dead behind us, and we are just going to run like hell and get all the loot in there. And indeed we have, and to my surprise, I'm actually able to make it all the way out of the graveyard alive. Normally that doesn't happen. I get mobbed by skeletons and cut down, but this time it actually worked. The items that we grabbed there are two particularly interesting early items, given that you can grab them from Firelink in 2 or 3 minutes. The first is a winged spear, which has slightly higher requirements than a regular spear, but is a better spear. If you're actually going to level one up for spear purposes, this is the best weapon short of the pike, which has pretty high stat requirements. The pike does have the advantage of range, but the winged spear is a lot more balanced and has good damage. The other one is the Zweihander, whatever it is. That's a two-handed sword. It's a huge weapon, and the notable thing about it is that its R2 attacks are huge overhand strikes that can actually knock enemies down. There are very few weapons that can do this, and the Zweihander causes immense poise damage, so it's really good for interrupting enemies or knocking them down. Of course, the requirements for it are pretty strong. It needs 24 strength to wield in one hand, but the way that strength works in Dark Souls is that if you're two-handing weapon, your effective strength is multiplied by 1.5. So what does that mean? Well, that means basically if we get up to 16, then if we were to two-hand it, we would end up having 24 strength. So that's one of the reasons why 16 is an interesting breakpoint there, and why a lot of pros will actually go with 16 to start. Of course, some people will go lower and just not use weapons like that, but the Zweihander has its advantages, and I'm intentionally not pronouncing it correctly at the same time. Now we've gone down into New Londo. This is an area that is considerably more advanced. It's one of those areas you're probably discouraged from going to first. If you're a new character prone to exploring, you might walk in here, get killed by the ghosts with no way to harm them, although the transient curses that they give you are actually the way that you can deal some damage to them. But with starting weapons, you're not going to hurt the ghosts very much, and there's really nothing much you can accomplish here until you've actually beaten the boss Sif. Instead, I'm just running down here and grab that firekeeper soul and drop down in the water and die. One reason why I wanted to have my souls low. Even if I had died in the graveyard, wouldn't have mattered, and I was definitely going to die here, because it's not really worth running back or wasting a homeward bone. The reason why we grabbed that firekeeper soul so early is because it's pretty much the first opportunity we have to reinforce our Estus flask, which I actually forgot to do here at this point. You could just pop down to Anastasia, the girl in the cage down there, and she could raise it to +1. Now, given our early starting health, we really don't have a whole lot of advantages from boosting our Estus Flask, because the Estus Flask will restore pretty much all of our HP. And honestly, this build that I'm using is going to be criminally low on HP, so it may not be all that important to reinforce it, but we actually can get it to +2 with almost no effort. I also stepped on the switch to raise that elevator beforehand. That's actually more of a speedrunner's trick. You can pull the switch and just call it down if you're down there, but if you're up top, like if you're dying a lot, which is likely to happen when I'm doing these runs, because these are basically early suicide runs to get good gear. I don't really have a leveled weapon, I don't really have much levels in my character, so I'm not going to be very effective for a while. Now the advantage here is that once we have done that, if we die, we can just run to the elevator and it's still up. That reduces our deaths from hilarious falling, which is kind of neat. Now the Undead Dragon, Zane's already shown this, Job's already shown this. It wakes up if you try and approach that Dragon Shield, Dragon Crest Shield. It'll stay asleep as long as you get everything else. Taurus Sword is an excellent thing to get early if you want to do that. Now, Zane mentioned in this review that most people don't run the right way, they run towards the claw. Actually, what I did was roll through, and also, as you can see, poison doesn't do quite as much damage as Zane thought it did. It doesn't really do any damage at all, but you don't want to end up getting poisoned. Anyway, the way I did it was I actually ended up rolling through the claw. And the way that works is my equipment burden is fairly low, so I'm able to do a reasonably fast roll. And the faster rolls have more invincibility frames, which is basically points during the roll where you cannot be knocked out of it, you cannot be damaged. I tried to roll through that Drake's Lightning, got stuck, and ended up getting killed. So that was not the best initial run. Normally I can get all the way through, but it didn't. And that's going to happen with those Drakes and their Lightning Breath, because your starting armor is really not going to last that lightning out. So we'll try again. Getting past the Undead Dragon, he can be killed, but he's only going to sit there spraying poison forever, so you can just time it and run through it. There's really no point. Now, you can't see it very well, but there's actually a cave just to the right. Inside that cave is one humanity, just a random item. It's not really worth jumping in there, though, because if that Drake is alive, it's just going to spray lightning into the whole length. We're running to the right here. It's an area that most of us didn't really bother with. It's actually a shortcut to a completely different area, one that most people see, but they may not come this way very much. So we're going to take the elevator up and end up in a little tunnel that has a bonfire. Where does this bonfire go? Well, we'll get a pop-up right about the time we approach it that tells all. Go a little past. We're going to rest here. Obviously, if we want to get back to Firelink, it's going to be some effort, but it's not really that big a deal. Now we're going to do some more suicide runs, and again, we're going to use the elevator trick to send it back up every time, so that I don't ever run off the ledge there and die. Now, what is it down here that we actually would want to do suicide runs for past all those damn Drakes? Well, there's a couple of things. Throughout the game, there are corpses that have the starting equipment sets of all the various classes in the game. So if you didn't pick a particular class, you can still get their starting equipment, which otherwise normally you can't get from those places. So for example, if you want to get a knight's gear, you can find a corpse that has it. This is the Brigand or Bandit kit. Axe. And a spider. Getting mobbed by 4 of those things is no fun. They are not really easy to kill at this level. But we're not going to give up, because the item that's there is something that I really do want. Now you may notice I've switched to the Dragon Crest shield. That's because unlike my leather shield, it is a medium shield with 100% physical block. It also has decent fire block, but its magic and lightning defenses are not so great, which is bad because these Drakes are pretty much just hitting with lightning. But it does allow me to block their charge swoops a little bit. There's actually some interesting advantages to shields in the game, and the reason why you don't see very many people using the light shields is because there's a number of features that shields have that are not. The one that most people know is the physical block. When you block something with your shield, percentage will take it off from that. So for example, if it's 80% physical block, you get hit for 100 damage, you take 20 through the shield. If it's 100, no matter how much damage it deals, all you take is stamina damage. So that's one reason why 100 is so useful. I'm just stopping for a minute to describe what we've got here. This is the red tearstone ring. If you're the whole hyper mode concept, the red tearstone ring is exactly that. When you're at low health, the red tearstone ring activates and gives you a 50% offensive boost. It's pretty huge, and we're going to be using that for a couple of gimmicks. To go back to the shield thing, the idea behind shields is two things. One is the blocking, so 100% physical block means if you get hit, you block it, period. The other thing is stability, which is the ability to actually block attacks. Now, as we're blocking this Black Knight here, he's using the halberd. You'll notice we're taking a fair chunk of stamina damage. The amount of stamina damage that we take is dependent on the attack we're getting hit by, and, perhaps just as importantly, the stability value of our shield. The higher the stability value is, the less stamina you take when you're blocking. Another reason why light shields are not very well preferred is because of that disadvantage of they're going to have low stability anyway, so if you do block an attack, even if they did have 100% physical block, it wouldn't do very good. With respect to the Black Knight, this is something Zane showed off but didn't really discuss. There's a way you can actually get Black Knights and certain other humanoid enemies into an infinite loop here. They turn around to try and face you when you're backstabbing them, but what ends up happening is you can actually walk around them slightly faster than that, although I guess I didn't have to backstab him at all. And you can actually get Black Knights into an infinite loop, where they're just going to keep turning around, putting their backs to you, getting stabbed, turning around, putting their backs to you, getting stabbed. Now the shield I just picked up is another medium shield. It's called the Grass Crest Shield. It doesn't have 100% physical block, but most people like it anyway, because what it does is those green arrows that have appeared under my bar now indicate that I am regenerating stamina faster. It's useful for running around, it's useful for blocking things more quickly, and it's also a great shield to use when you're two-handing a weapon, because two-handed weapons use a whole lot of stamina, and if you're two-handing, then you can't really use a shield for blocking, unless you quickly switch back to it. So this is a good handy shield for that. I will continue our discussion of shields in a minute, but I've got some things that I'm doing in the run here that are useful. The other thing here is this Crystal Lizard, which is a rare one-time only enemy. They all drop Twinkling Titanite, and they all drop chunks or bits of other types of Titanite, which are used for upgrading weapons. They'll run away and disappear if you don't see them, but unlike the ones in Demon Souls, they will always respawn until you've actually killed them, after which point they won't. The useful thing with that is that you can actually quit and reload the game, and they'll reappear again, so they're pretty easy to get, actually. This corpse has the Hunter starting gear with the leather gear, but it also has a longbow, which is interesting because the Hunter actually starts with a short bow. The longbow is a really nice bow. The short bow is not bad. It's just pretty much the same thing with the same range, but worse damage, and the arrows don't fly as far. That makes the longbow a really useful early game item, and it requires 14 dexterity to wield, which conveniently is exactly as much as we have. So it's a very useful ranged weapon, and as you can see, we only had to get by some drakes, the Undead Dragon, and a single Black Knight to get it, which sounds daunting, but if you just run like hell, you can pretty much avoid all of them. Where we're going from here now is a place that might be more familiar to people. We're actually coming out of Darkroot Basin, which is the place where we ended up when we took the thing, into Darkroot Garden. And in fact, we're right at the entrance of Darkroot Garden, near Andre's blacksmith area, near the Undead Parish. And we've done this without dealing with Andre, without dealing with the Taurus demon. We've completely skipped all of that. And that's the first major sequence break. Oh, and here I am getting eaten by a tree, showing off how crappy I actually am at this. So we will have to wait that time. Going back to the discussion of shields, high stability is obviously good because you lose less stamina when you block. There is another trait that shields have, that actually two traits that I can think of, that is not documented anywhere in the game. And From Software apparently didn't want you to know this, or just didn't really tell you about it. First of those is this thing called deflection. Deflection is basically tied mostly to the type of shield. Light shields have light deflection, medium shields have medium deflection, and great shields have high deflection. And that actually affects how long and how badly enemies actually bounce off your shield when they hit you. The Pyromancer starting shield, the cracked wooden shield, is actually the only shield in the entire game that I'm aware of, other than a shield that's broken, that has 0 deflection, which means that you can just pound on somebody who's wielding that all day and you're never going to bounce off. Heavy deflection means that you're actually going to leave yourself exposed for quite a while. So the heavier shields actually have an additional value in addition to the high stability and generally higher block stats. Things will actually bounce off your shield more likely, and heavier attacks can be deflected. A medium shield might not deflect the Capra Demon's attacks, but a great shield actually potentially could. We're going to come up here to the Parish. And again, we've completely skipped all the stuff that we would normally have to do in order to get into the Parish. We've skipped the Taurus demon, we've skipped the entire lower Undead Berg, we've even skipped the Drake, and we can go back for these things, and we will, but we don't have to do them right away. In fact, if you just run that way, and if you run like hell through all the Drakes, through the Black Knight, you don't have to fight anything to get to Andre. Which is interesting if you want to do an early upgrade, that sort of thing. But you're going to need chunks and souls to do it, which there are a few places around here we can do that. So I decided to fight this guy, clear him out of the way, and get an item that I wanted. Unfortunately, as before, I was not doing something like this, and I was using the scimitar, even though... And he slams me down, and it's interesting, I end up in red tearstone. So then I frantically try to switch to the longsword. Somehow he doesn't manage to kill me in the meantime, but he gets me with that second sword. The red tearstone ring, if you have weapons and just speed up some things, it can actually be pretty helpful because that offensive boost will at least allow your backstabs to be a bit stronger. Not great, but not fantastic. Okay, now that we actually have the longsword and are going to be playing this a little bit more cautious, let's take this guy. He doesn't respawn. He doesn't really drop anything useful. He might give you a great sword if you're lucky, but there's really no point. The great sword has very high strength requirements, and most people prefer the moveset in this way under anyway, so the great sword is not that popular. Still, if you get one, I guess it's okay. Especially if you're going for a strength build. But you can't really expect him to drop it, and because he's non-respawning, you don't have to. Other than that, he drops some Titanite shards. It's not great, but it's useful for an early up. Titanite shard will get you one weapon to +1. So it's not a bad investment. You can get Titanite shards from a lot of enemies here in the Parish, which is fitting, because this is, of course, the place where you're going to first meet Andre. It's slow going to deal with this guy, but it is kind of useful to go ahead and out, in part because you don't want him harassing you every time you come through here from the Firelink shortcut, but also because there's a firekeeper soul right there, which you've seen in some of the other runs. It's probably the single most obvious firekeeper soul in the game. It's not hidden anywhere. It's easy to get to. You'll also notice, and I believe Zane, this guy tried to do the same thing. He tried to heal using an Estus flask. Many humanoid enemies actually have Estus flasks. The Hollow Soldiers do. Those guys do. I'm not sure if Black Knights do. I've never seen one try to swig an Estus flask. But it is possible that they do. I'm not sure. The Estus flask will do just what it does for you. It'll heal them for several hundred points of damage. And for most hollows and things like that, the odds are it'll fully heal them. So that kind of sucks. We've gotten ourselves back to Firelink, so we are now right back where we started the game, except we are significantly better off in terms of stats and gear, and we haven't even entered the Berg yet we've already made it to the Parish, and unlocked Andre and gotten his bonfire and everything like that. Oh, but we can get stronger still, and we will.